Among the greatest debates of all time, you have the likes of cats versus dogs, chocolate versus vanilla, brushing your teeth versus not brushing your teeth, and lying that you did. But perhaps the greatest of all would be physical versus digital video games. So let's have them duke it out. And hey, would you look at that? Physical games come out swinging, but it's hard to deny the digital game's defense. Yeah, you can't hold a digital game in your hand, whereas a physical game you can. And probably will. Your hands will thank you. And here we have the first big argument in favor of physical games: ownership. People like to feel like they own their games. Real quick before I go to bed, yep, just making sure they're still there. Actually, might as well throw in a kiss goodnight while I'm at it. But hold on a second. Why do some people say you don't own your games if you have digital copies of them? I mean, it's not like the old days of renting video games where you'll get called up and given a semi-confrontational reminder that your game needs to be brought back. Once you purchase a digital game, you own it forever until your console's dead. But then you can just buy another console, link your account to it, and download it again, for most consoles at least. And assuming the servers haven't been shut down, boy, do we worry about those servers getting shut down. And not for any particular reason, other than, I don't know, because they do. But regardless of how reliable they may or may not sound to you, some people just feel a lot more secure knowing they have a physical copy. People feel reassured to see it sitting on their shelf. Gives them less anxiety about what could potentially happen in the future. Do I trust the higher-ups at some massive company to not pull the plug on the servers, or do I trust myself to not drop the game on the ground? Naturally, physical copies of games is something that affects collectors more than others. The idea of digital games over physical games poses a threat to our very passion. How am I supposed to collect physical copies of games if they don't exist? Yeah, that's a tough one. Ideally, there would be both physical and digital copies of games. That way, everybody gets what they want. But the fear is that digital copies of games will eventually take over and be the only option. Wasn't that supposed to have already happened by now, though? Well, as much as digital copies of games have increased in popularity, a market for those who prefer physical copies has remained and seems to be big enough to keep it viable for a certain type of customer when offered on a certain scale. The question will be, for how long? And hey, depending when you watch this video, maybe it already happened. I mean, things change. That's the way the world works. When it comes to technology, things tend to get more streamlined. Forget games, one day there may not even be physical consoles or controllers. And heck, maybe no TVs either. It can all just happen inside your mind. Check out me playing F-Zero GX. Also, it's worth mentioning that while people talk about digital games being something you can't rely on to have forever, the same could be said of physical games too. Now, let's just say you spend the rest of your existence protecting your games with your life. They could still go bad. The parts inside of a cartridge should last for a very long time, but not forever. And I'm not just talking about those pesky save batteries. Other parts inside the cartridge can go bad too, but again, in most cases, probably not for a really long time. And you can at least replace those parts in theory, and heck, you could even just purchase a replacement copy of that game cartridge altogether. But with digital games, you're screwed once the servers go down. Just ask fans of the Silent Hill PT demo, which was infamously taken down. But don't worry, you can still get it no problem. Just look on eBay for a console that still has it downloaded onto the hard drive. Looks like the physical collectors who like to pay big bucks are back in business. The tricky thing with digital games is that all the licensing agreements need to be sorted out for a game to be sold digitally. Fans of Marvel vs. Capcom probably feel like the children of a celebrity couple. High divorce rates and not a great chance of staying together for the long haul, but no, it's not your fault they separated. Unsurprisingly, the digital version of that game hasn't haven't always been available. Again, it comes down to not trusting what is going to happen with these digital games moving forward, and the desire to future-proof your video games. After all, retro gamers in particular are in the business of playing decades worth of games. When I'm 118 years old, I want to be able to play Choo Choo Rocket with my great-great-grandchildren. But what about disc rot? Process by which discs start to deteriorate, a very real concern, although I should point out that certain discs are more susceptible to experiencing this sooner than others due to storing your discs in unideal environments or due to manufacturing defects. Twin Snakes is a good example of that. In any case, you can't depend on your disc games to last forever. Maybe I'll just try to Walt Disney my copy of Choo Choo Rocket to see what happens. I actually have seen discussion of freezing discs for various reasons, but nothing conclusive as far as results go that I could find. Alright, but what about the space that physical copies of games take up? Sometimes collecting physical can look like something went wrong, like walking into some sort of hoarder's house. Well, that can happen, but a lot of collectors take good care of their collections, seeing as it's something they're passionate about. Heck, for some collectors, their collection is the most well-taken care of place in their home. What can be said, coming up with playful ways to display your amiibo is far more fun than figuring out what's clogging your toilet. Hey, looks like I'm back in business to set up my amiibo display. But still, it's hard to argue against the fact that having less stuff in your home can be nice, and physical copies of video games qualify as stuff. Some people prefer to go digital because they don't have to worry about finding space for it, something that becomes less of an issue when you enjoy the process of finding a place for it. Talk to some collectors who just put up a bookcase that they filled with video games, and you might as well be talking to a parent holding their newborn child. Personally, I like to keep my games in places that are thematically appropriate. But besides having less stuff taking up space, fans of digital games will also praise the convenience of not having to go to the store or have a game shipped to them, in addition to not having to physically switch out games, something that physical copies of games require, having you get off the couch to swap out your games every time you want to play something different. Some would say it's not a big deal to do this, and I would say total suckers. I haven't gotten up to change a game in years. Alright, now we've talked about the idea of owning your games with physical copies, which, if we're talking about older games, then great. Those games will always be yours to play so long as they're in working condition. But if we're talking about games that came out post-internet, this is where the I own my games parade can come to a sudden and screeching halt. Because there's so many updates and patches to games, one could argue that your physical copy might as well be a digital copy. But at least you could just play the game the way it was launched, right? Well, unfortunately, a lot of games will even have day one patches. You can technically still play the game the way it comes straight off the disc, but it might be vastly inferior to whatever version of the game is most up to date with the latest patches, and then perhaps even things like downloadable content as well. So again, once your console breaks and the servers are shut down that supply those updates and downloadable content, you're just as screwed as you would have been had you purchased a digital copy. You do still got yourself a stylish coaster though, while digital owners have got themselves nasty water rings. Looks like physical copy owners got the last laugh on this one. Also, you can still play the game without its updates, and some physical copies are totally fine right out of the box, especially smaller games or any type of release that came out later on with all the patches and updates already applied. Also, something I find interesting is that it's possible for some games to be supported again at some point in the future. Like some of these original Xbox games. If you have the disc, you can play these again on a newer Xbox console with brand new updates that spice things up like resolution and frame rate. Although, there's really nothing preventing this from happening with digital copies of games that your account shows you purchased at some point. It just depends on whether the company is nice enough and has set things up for you to do this, which isn't always the case. How many times have some of you purchased Super Mario Brothers? Personally, the biggest problem I find with digital copies of games is that you can't sell them back. With physical copies, you can easily sell your game when you're done with it, and depending how quickly you beat it, you may even be able to sell it for as much as you bought it for. With the digital copy, it's just money spent and money gone. If you add that money up, well, it could be a lot. And last I checked, people like to save money. So, digital versus physical, who wins? Naturally, I would say physical copies overall, keeping in mind I'm totally biased. No one expected a different answer from me unless you were to say that digital copies will ultimately be the best way to preserve video games moving forward, via emulation, where you see a lot of effort from fans and the community to make sure these games will be accessible for the long haul, including any younger gamers that I would gladly invite to play some older video games. But with that said, I'd be curious to hear everybody else's thoughts on this, and I'm telling you right now, there's gonna be people who disagree with you, but remember to be kind to each other. So with that, leave your comments down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games. He's